so what a day. A lot of breaking news tonight. It's entirely possible, of course, some other shocking news will break this hour. We're following multiple huge stories tonight. A year's worth of news to fit into 1 hour, and it's a lot. So buckle up.
Buckle up indeed. We wanted to take a look at what all these explosive headlines added up to and how we can all, as consumers, make sense of it. So we went ahead and looked at the chyrons, that's a term for the cable news banners on the bottom of the screen, and we picked out just some of the banners that appeared on CNN this week. It's going to take more than 3 minutes to go through all these. We'll slow it down for you in a minute, but I just want you to think about how fast they're going by, how much news is piling up on the screen. I mean, we're barely to the middle of the week at this point. It's Wednesday now, and I'm exhausted, I'm overwhelmed, just taking a look at the list. So what should journalists do to help? What can viewers and news consumers do to keep up? I think that's the conversation that we need to have at a moment like this, where it really does feel like the White House is in a rolling, ongoing crisis. Now, the banners are still going. We're going to come back to those in a minute.
These are enormous achievements from the point of view of the right. And I think Trump's approval rating and the chaos story tends to overshadow that, this has been an enormously consequential 13 months.
If there is chaos, and there is, and if there are 100 stories competing for our attention, which there are, we just got to Friday on our list of headlines here, isn't that benefiting the president or benefiting the people that might be under investigation? Talking about these various agencies where there's been exorbitant spending, there's been all these stories about embarrassing scandals in various departments, and yet if they don't stay on the banner for more than 5 minutes, don't those people benefit?
Yeah, I do think it's a kind of case where, every 15 seconds, it seems, the spotlight swings somewhere else. And some of the most eyebrow-raising stuff, the story, that just broke about the United Arab Emirates' attempts to perhaps curry favor with the White House, with Kushner.
Big New York Times front page story this morning.
I mean, some of these stories, I think, really require, from a substantive point of view, some sustained attention. And yet, every 15 seconds, it's like not that I use this, it's almost like Tinder. We're swiping right and swiping left every 10 seconds for the next hot story.
Right. That's what I've heard about Tinder. Yeah. Jeff, stand by. Let's bring in two people who may or may not use it. I don't know, some younger guests who are covering the White House every day. Olivia Nosy, who's covering Washington for New York Magazine, and Josh Dawsey, White House reporter for the Washington Post and a CNN political analyst. Josh, first time on Reliable Sources, so first to you, what story mattered most to you amid this flood of news this week?
Well, I think the president's comments on tariffs was certainly, widely consequential. You have all sorts of reverberations around the world. You have foreign leaders calling. You have lots of schisms in his own party, and some unions and Democrats who are supporting it. It was not done through a normal policy process, and it's something he obviously wants to continue. He continued to say he wants, more tariffs on cars, German cars. And then you have also gun control. I mean, that got some attention this week, but you had a president who was zigzagging all over the place. Does he want to take guns from people? He's meeting with the NRA. Everyone thinks he's on their side. And, this is like one of the big political issues of our time. And you have a president who seems, whoever he's in the room with at the given time, to be on the team. And I think that issue deserves a lot of attention as well.
Yeah, there's one thing that's happening when he's in front of the cameras, then he has these off-camera meetings where he's saying something different, and that causes a lot of confusion. Olivia, how do you cope with this flood of news? And how do your parents, how do your friends cope? How should we as consumers cope?
Well, I'm not coping well, but I am trying. But I think it is misguided to look at all of the different stories about infighting and scandals and say, well, this is a distraction from more serious news. Because the fact is, if we want to understand this president's decision-making process, I think it's very important to understand the way that he operates within the White House, the way that his most senior aides operate, and what their agendas are. And I want to point out, that very serious and being possibly corrupted and targeted by foreign governments, that was the result, if you really look at it and go back, that was the result of initially a tabloid story in the Daily Mail about two White House staffers dating that then led to us finding out about all this information about security clearances that then led to some fantastic investigative reporting from the Washington Post and other outlets. So I think, as in this White House especially, the silly stuff turns out to be very serious very often.
I think there's sometimes a sense, watching and reading all this coverage, that the wheels are falling off of the Trump administration. And I think that causes some people to tune in because they want to know exactly how bad things are. But then it might cause other people just to tune out, not want to hear it, not want to try to make sense of it all. Is that something you've seen in the past, Jeff, or is this unique?
I think there's always a tendency on the part of a president's loyalists to look at negative coverage and say they're picking on him. But the difference is, first of all, you have a big counter press. If you think back to Watergate and wonder what would have been like had there been a Fox News, a Breitbart, a Hannity pounding away at the press for being biased and liberal and leftist, you wonder whether or not it would have developed quite the same way.
Would it have? Would it have?
I write alternate history, but I don't do predictions.
Okay.
I think the combination of the counter press defending the president, and if the Republicans had been in control of Congress instead of the Democrats, as the Republicans are now, Watergate might well have played out very differently. And I think the drumbeat of Woodward and Bernstein, and remember how less there was of coverage.
Right, how much less? Yeah.
No cable news, no social media.
Right.
It might well have played out differently.
Yeah. Jeff, great to see you.
Thanks
for being here. Josh and Olivia, please stick around. We are now 2.5 weeks after the mass shooting at Marjory Stoneman Douglas High School in Florida. Kept the media spotlight on the school and on the issue of gun violence. My next guest says the reason they've been so successful is because the students took control of the media narrative and took it away from Donald Trump. Quote, they were able to beat Trump at his own game. Joining me now is Jordan Klepper. He's the host of The Opposition on Comedy Central. Normally, you're a guy that plays like an Alex Jones-style conspiracy theory character.
Yeah, real likable guy.
That's your shtick. I had to go on with you. It was pretty intimidating.
Yeah, I think
having to face off with you.
I'm sorry, I can be a very intimidating guy.
But here you are being serious about gun violence. Why is it this issue that you've tried to bring to the forefront and not just joke about?
Yeah, well, I covered a lot of the gun debate at The Daily Show. I went through the process of what it would take for a good guy with a gun to stop a bad guy with a gun. I talked to people on both sides of the Dickey Amendment and the argument with funding the CDC, and quickly realized that in America there is so much more common ground. I think it was really frustrating because that wasn't the narrative that was getting out into the public. And so I did a special that was focusing on that.
Right.
As somebody who comes from Michigan, I have a lot of gun folks in my family and my surroundings.
Gun folks, meaning people that own guns and want to ensure that there isn't gun control.
Well, yeah, I think we're guns mean something different than what they mean in New York. I say where hunting is an issue.
Right.
And so for me, I felt like I was so frustrated because I got to talk to people who had guns, people who didn't have guns, and saw that there was a different narrative here that wasn't being covered. And so
what is the common ground that you find?
I think the common ground, if you have a gun, you don't want somebody to have a gun who can do some harm with that gun. And I think that's a very basic thing. And I think the NRA takes this narrative and they make it all about grabbing guns. They make it about all these hyperbolic elements where you see the discussion that's happening this week, and the majority of people agree on the same thing with the gun issue. And I think there's not enough attention paid to what the majority wants. It's just with this very small minority that feels like a majority, this gun lobby has a much louder voice than it needs to.
So is this for you kind of what Jimmy Kimmel has with healthcare? He's talked about healthcare on his show in a very serious way. Do you view gun violence that way for you as a comedian, that maybe you can get through to people in a way that others can't?
For me, it is something that I've been involved with, covering with The Daily Show, with my special, and with this, and it keeps happening. And so as somebody with a platform, we want to follow the conversation. And right now, I think it's a really interesting, powerful conversation with these students from Parkland. That
you had a couple of them on your show, too.
We did, yes. Again, finding comedy in this is difficult, but I think a spotlight on some of these heroes. We had a couple students who came on and they talked about what they want to do with this movement, and I think they were able to beat Trump as his own game, as we talked about earlier. They're not cynical, they're passionate, they're able to reach out to other students who feel this way as well, and they're able to own the media narrative in a way that I haven't seen since Donald Trump's become president. For me, that was really exciting to see people look at this debate through new glasses.
There's also something about the word survivor, meaning that every student in that school was a survivor.
Mm-hmm.
But I'm not sure the Columbine survivors were talked about that way almost 20 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not sure even at Virginia Tech the students were talked about that way.
Mm-hmm.
Being a survivor means that you have something that you've lived through that hopefully no one else ever will, that gives you an opportunity to talk. I just think there's something about the language that's been used in this coverage that's different. It's also different that the students have been so available for interviews.
Yeah, well, they also now have the social media platform that they're so well versed in that they can get their voice out. That they can see themselves as a survivor, but they also see themselves now as activists, and they're not going to sit on the sidelines anymore. And that's really remarkable to watch.
Which brings up this question we've started to see in the television coverage this week. Is this time really different? Is there actually going to be action as a result of another massacre? What's your guess?
I really hope that it is. I mean, we've gone through this before, but we haven't gone through it with these voices that are uncynical and who are really starting to hold these folks in positions of power, hold their feet to the fire. And it felt like in the past, sadly, these narratives have gone by, and 4 or 5 days later, they've passed away. And I feel like what we have now with these Parkland students is they're keeping the narratives there. It's something we're rallying around, and I do have optimism that this has a new face and a new energy.
As for your other work on the opposition, playing this bombastic conspiracy theory believer, do you think you give more attention to Alex Jones than he actually deserves? Alex Jones, host of InfoWars, full of lies on his web video show. This week he's in the news because YouTube, let's put on screen the story about YouTube. YouTube is starting to take a closer look at his channel, and they're thinking about maybe blocking his channel. This headline here says he's 2 strikes away from being banned. Would it be a good thing for him to be banned from YouTube and have less talk about Alex Jones?
I think if we can stop some of the bile that he excretes out into our media landscape, I think that is a good thing. I mean, we see him with the shooting as well, creating these ideas of crisis actors and putting that out. There's suddenly that was a narrative that took hold, and people started pushing back against these survivors to try to delegitimize their experiences. And I think that is vile and disgusting. And I think for us, what we try to do is we try to shine a light on what is affecting the narrative and try to poke some holes in that.
Right. Great to see you. Thanks for being here, Jordan.
Thanks for having me.
And one more note about the students, about the school there in Florida. There's this crowdsourcing campaign you might want to check out to help the students at Marjory Stoneman Douglas High School to document the aftermath of the tragedy for their school paper and for their yearbook. Both the paper and the yearbook are self-funded. So we have a story up on CNN.com about the crowdfunding campaign. As of this morning, they've surpassed their goal, and now they've upped the goal to $50,000. You can find that